We are moving on to week 7, and when you sit down and try to start ranking the teams, it's very tough at first. It's very tough to differentiate between these teams when you've got so many inconsistencies. You've got teams that have looked really good at times and look terrible at times. Like, how do you rank a team like that? So it comes down to resume, and I think earlier than ever, I have switched my rankings completely over to resume. So the first few weeks, you're trying to rank the teams based off of their performance. How good have they performed on the field? And because, again, we've seen so many ups and downs with these teams and the craziness already of this season, I think you gotta throw that out the window. It's time to just rank the teams based off of what they have earned, what they have done in terms of who they have beaten and what they have on their resume, and that's how we're ranking teams the rest of the season. And this will probably transition into our playoff ranking prediction series as we get to the playoff rankings. But for now, I'm just going to rank the teams like this, and I think you're going to be shocked by one of the teams in my top 5, but they absolutely deserve to be there based off of what they have done, what they have accomplished on the field. Again, we're not really looking at the eye test. We're not really looking at who's performed the best at certain times, because I don't think any teams have looked great all year, like every game, all game. So it's just about the resume. So let's get right into it. And you're going to see 21 through 25 here. And some people might see this and be, wow, SEC bias. Look at Ole Miss, LSU, Oklahoma, Missouri, all there in a row. But I'm pretty sure, and I don't even know where these teams are ranked in the other polls, because I do not look at the other polls at all. It's a brand new top 25 for me every week, and again, I don't base it off of any of that. But I'm pretty sure those teams, or at least most of them, are probably ranked higher in other top 25s. But they did all make it into the rankings for me. Missouri at number 25. Again, this is based off of only resume only. That's really all we're looking at here. So Missouri, they do have a win over Vanderbilt, which now looks like a pretty good win. They have a win over Boston College. So, I mean, they're barely ranked. But I tell you what, there are some two-loss teams that you could consider. But I did not consider I wasn't going to rank a two-loss team unless their 2 losses came to top 25 teams. And they also had to have at least a couple of good wins. And we really just don't have any two-loss teams that have that right now. You can look at Louisville. Their losses came to top 25 teams, SMU, Notre Dame, but they only have the win over Georgia Tech. I mean, I need to see another quality win before I'm willing to rank a two-loss team. So yeah, look at USC. The losses, that's what gets them there. They lost to Minnesota. Minnesota is not a top 25 team. So Michigan, or excuse me, circle back there. Yeah, USC lost. Michigan beat Minnesota, but they lost to Washington. I was getting confused there with Minnesota. Michigan lost to Washington, and that was, that's not a top 25 team. So, yeah, I couldn't put a two-loss team in there. We go to 24 now. That's Oklahoma, only 1 loss. Came to a top 25 team. They've got wins over Houston, who looks a little better now. Tulane and Auburn. Not a great resume, but it's enough. It's enough to get them in these rankings. The other one-loss teams just weren't quite as good, in my opinion, with the resume. Look at Colorado. They're up for consideration. They've got a win over UCF and Baylor, and they've looked better, but that's really about it. Rutgers has a win over Washington, a win over Virginia Tech, but yeah, there's just not a lot of options with these one-loss teams that I did not rank. I just don't think there are any others that deserve to be ranked. LSU wins over South Carolina, UCLA, not great, and they also lost to USC, but USC is right there. I mean, they're in consideration for a top 25 spot. I think the South Carolina win a little bit better than the wins for the teams behind them. Ole Miss also beat South Carolina, but they beat them a lot easier than LSU did. So I think it makes sense to put Ole Miss ahead of LSU. Of course, they'll play this weekend and settle that. And then Nebraska at number 21. Colorado's a pretty good win. Rutgers is a pretty good win, and their only loss came to Illinois, who is ranked. So Nebraska, I think, deserves to be ranked. I'm not sure if they were. I don't think they were in the top 25. Again, I didn't really look at it, but if they were, maybe I missed that. But here we go, 16 through 20. So Illinois right ahead of them. I think Illinois and Nebraska have pretty similar resumes. Illinois did lose to Penn State, who's a top 10 team, and they beat Nebraska head-to-head. So, again, going with resume and how the playoff committee would rank these teams, Illinois. And I said this is based off of resume. It's not just resume. It is, we're kind of using that playoff criteria where head-to-head is going to come into play when we have two really even teams. So Illinois ahead of Nebraska. Boise State at number 19. The Washington State win is really all they have, but I think you also have to look at how close they played Oregon, and they had a chance to win that game. So you have to look at those types of things a little bit. Boise State at 19, SMU at 18. So I don't know. I don't think they were ranked very high either. But that win over Louisville was a solid win. TCU win, maybe not that great. Florida State, and again, Florida State's not very good, but the way they beat them compared to the other teams that have been beating Florida State, that was an impressive win for SMU, in my opinion, to win as easily as they did. So SMU, that win over Louisville, they're up to number 18. Utah at 17. They only have one over Oklahoma State. They lost to Arizona, but again, how do you judge Utah without Cam Rising? That's the big question mark there. And I really don't know what the fair way to rank them is, but I'm going to put them at 17. Pittsburgh at number 16. So they're 5-0, but they just don't really have much of a resume. Now, the West Virginia win looks better, especially after West Virginia beat Oklahoma State. So they've got that win. That's a decent win for them. And then you've got Cincinnati and North Carolina, really not great wins there. But, yeah, West Virginia is the one thing keeping Pitt ranked as high as they are. So let's go now to the top 15. 11 through 15. We've got Kansas State at number 15. They are 4-1. The Wildcats have wins over Tulane, Arizona, and Oklahoma State. Pretty good wins, but their loss came to BYU, and BYU is, we haven't shown them yet. They're ranked higher, so that's not a bad loss. Even though they got blown out in that game, it was a weird game. It was close late in the second quarter, and just had like an avalanche of turnovers and big plays, and it was just a weird game. So Kansas State, I think, you look at them, not a bad loss. Again, if you look at who they lost to, if you look at the score, you might say that was a bad loss. And then Arizona, Oklahoma State, Tulane, those are decent wins, pretty solid wins. So Kansas State at number 15. Number 14 is Indiana. We're kind of waiting on a resume from them. They are 6-0. They have wins over Maryland, UCLA, Northwestern. Not great wins, but they won those games fairly easily, especially the UCLA game. When you look at how Penn State and LSU have played UCLA, that impresses me enough to put them at 14. Tennessee at number 13. So they've got to win over a top 25 Oklahoma. That's a pretty solid win. And then NC State really is not a great win. That team's pretty bad. But they lost to Arkansas. So Tennessee, really, because of the win over Oklahoma, that's the only thing keeping them in the top 15 for me. Texas A&M at number 12. Just an impressive performance against Missouri. I mean, that was, I thought they would win, but I didn't see it happening like that. So Missouri, a top 25 win for them. They've also got wins over Florida and Arkansas, and their only loss came to Notre Dame, who is ranked ahead of them. So Texas A&M looking good. Iowa State number 11. They're 5-0. The Iowa win, that's really their only decent win. I guess the Houston win now looks a little better. So yeah, Iowa State at number 11, and then Clemson at number 10. Florida State, NC State, Stanford. That's really the only teams they've beaten, the Power 4 teams they've beaten. But I think you have to give them credit for, and I know people hate to hear this term, you have to give them credit for the loss. They lost to a good team, so I'm not going to penalize them too much. If they had played an FCS team in the non-conference instead of Georgia, and they won that game by 50 points, and they were undefeated, where would people rank Clemson? They'd probably have them up pretty high. And I realize Georgia didn't look so hot against Alabama, but that was just in the first half. Second half, I think we saw the true Georgia, and they took care of business against Auburn. We'll get to Georgia in just a second. But, yeah, Clemson right there at number 10. And, yeah, sorry, forgot to change my graphic. There is Clemson at number 10. So it's Clemson at 10. Notre Dame at number 9. All right, so again, how do you judge the Northern Illinois loss? That's the question. I think you have to look at what we've seen from them in their wins, though. A win over Texas A&M, a win over Louisville. Those are very solid wins. Again, Texas A&M for me is a top 15 team. Louisville is maybe number 26. I mean, they are borderline top 25. And so again, I don't know if the playoff committee was ranking teams, I don't know what they would do about the Northern Illinois game, but based off of everything else that I've seen, again, I still feel like that was a game where Notre Dame really didn't show. They didn't show up. That was not the Notre Dame team that we have seen throughout most of the year. So maybe you disagree with that. That's fine. Miami at number 8. So if you look at their resume, it's really not great. Virginia Tech, Florida, and Cal. It's a little bit better than Iowa State. It's a little bit better than Pitt. So I think they do deserve to be ranked up here in the top 10. And again, if we're going by playoff committee, it wouldn't matter. The scores don't matter. So the way they beat Virginia Tech and Cal, that would not matter. I think you have to look at that a little bit, though. So, yeah, I do not have Miami in the top 5. They've dropped a little bit for me at number 8. Number 7, all right, so Alabama 6, 7 is Georgia. I think Georgia's a better team than Alabama. I said this the other day, or maybe yesterday. I think if these teams played 10 times, Georgia would probably win, I don't know, 7 or 8 times. I think they're the better team. I think Alabama hit them with a bunch of stuff that they were not prepared for in the first half of that game, but the second half really showed us how it was a better measuring stick of these two teams, in my opinion. Again, it's hard to say right now. So I understand if you think Georgia's better than Alabama. You realize Alabama just lost to Vanderbilt, but going by resumes, Alabama has this great win over Georgia, and if you look at the head-to-head, that's really the difference. Alabama beat Georgia, so with the same number of losses, I cannot put Georgia ahead of Alabama. So that's the way I've got them. So now let's get to the top 5. And again, we've got a surprise at number 5, BYU. And I don't think people are going to like this. But if you're going by resume, they absolutely deserve to be ranked in this spot. They have a win over a top 25 SMU. They have a win over a top 25 Kansas State. They also have a win over Baylor. And they don't have any losses. So, yeah, BYU should be ranked at least in the top 10. Do I think that they would beat Alabama or Georgia or Notre Dame or Clemson? No. But, again, it's what you've earned. It's not what we think would happen, who we think would win. That's a silly way to rank teams, at least at this point, because we've got enough. We've got some resumes that are starting to build up. So I'm going to give BYU this top 5 spot because they have earned it by beating SMU and by beating Kansas State. 2 very good wins. And so I've got the Cougars there at number 5. I've got Oregon at number 4. They are looking better now. We've seen them kind of dominate against the Power 4 teams. They've got the win over Boise State. Penn State at number 3. Top 25 win over Illinois. They got the win over West Virginia. Win over UCLA. They've looked pretty solid. And again, I think their resume a little bit better than Oregon's. And then the top 2 teams, Ohio State and Texas. You could argue that their resumes are actually not as good as Penn State, Oregon, and even BYU's in terms of wins. But these teams have they've looked dominant throughout the year. They haven't really had even a moment of struggle. I mean, maybe some slow starts for Ohio State, but these 2 teams, to me, they've kind of separated themselves just for the fact that they have been so dominant. Both teams have pretty similar resumes. So, yeah, Ohio State beat Michigan State. Texas beat Mississippi State. That's a little bit of an advantage there for Ohio State. And then Ohio State beat Iowa. Texas beat Michigan. Those are pretty even. So at the end of the day, I separated these top 2 teams with the resumes, but just complete performances, complete domination from these 2 teams separated them from the rest of the pack for me. So yeah, mostly going by resume, but again, when you've been that impressive and you're undefeated and you've had somewhat similar resumes, I think we can put Ohio State and Texas at the top. So to me, those are the best 2 teams in the country. Again, resume-wise, 3 through 25, that's exactly how I'd rank them. If you wanted to really get into the resume, you could possibly put Penn State, Oregon, or BYU even higher, even ahead of Ohio State or Texas. But again, they just haven't been as dominant in my opinion. So that's why I went with Ohio State at 1, Texas at 2. I just believe that those are the 2 best teams based off of what I've seen. So I'd love to get your thoughts on my top 25. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of criticism. So go ahead and let me know down in the comments below.